Welcome, welcome everyone to our inaugural Practitioner Fellowship celebration. I'm Alice Kim, Director of Human Rights Practice at the Posen Family Center for Human Rights. And I'm so thrilled to welcome Ronaldo Hudson and Tara Betts as our inaugural Practitioner Fellows. The idea of this fellowship was born out of the work my co-conspirator Tracy Matthews and I have been doing since we launched the Mass Incarceration Working Group on campus a year and a half ago. We created this working group to make more visible the social injustices caused by mass incarceration, to create pathways to higher education for those who are currently and formerly incarcerated, and to foster a culture of solidarity on our campus with system-impacted communities and individuals. This particular fellowship brings together these values and aspirations by acknowledging, supporting, and celebrating the work of our inaugural fellows, whose creative work, activism, and scholarship have deep ties to system-impacted communities and really embodies what it means to be an artist and poet for the people. James Baldwin said that art has to be a kind of confession, one in which you examine and face your life. You can discover the terms with which you are connected to other lives, and they can discover them too. Most of us, no matter what we say, are walking in the dark, whistling in the dark. Nobody knows what is going to happen to them from one moment to the next, or how one will bear it. It is true that the nature of society is to create among its citizens an illusion of safety. But it is also absolutely true that the safety is always necessarily an illusion. Artists are here to disturb the peace. They have to disturb the peace. So I'm excited to see what our fellows will create during their fellowships. I'm looking forward to seeing them disturb the peace. So I also want to acknowledge the Posen Center Human Rights Lab and Race Center's teams who have helped to develop this fellowship and bring it to life. Michael Fisher, Marilyn Willis, Madeline Wright, Tiara Kilpatrick, Lucia Gang, David Knight, and C. Riley Snorton, the interim faculty director of the Race Center, who will be moderating tonight's conversation with the Astor Gates. But before we get to that, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the lab's artist in residence, Mama Dorothy Burge, who's on this call, on this Zoom. Mama Dorothy's residency was cut short last spring when the pandemic hit. Mama Dorothy is an exquisite fabric artist and multimedia artist and a longtime activist in Chicago who has been a pioneer in the fight against police violence in our city. We wanted to give you a glimpse into her amazing quilt artistry, and we're looking forward to welcoming Mama Dorothy back when the campus opens back up. So we have a short montage to share with you today to kick off our time together. Thanks so much, Lucia. We will make that available. Apologies for some of the interference that we had going on there. And there was some beautiful music that Damon Locks provided too. So we'll make sure that folks have access to that after this. And thank you, Mama Dorothy. We love you. We appreciate you. And now I will hand things over to the inimitable Riley Snorton.
Thanks so much, Alice, and greetings, everyone. My name is C. Riley Snorton. I'm the interim faculty director of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, and a professor of English and Gender and Sexuality Studies here at the University of Chicago. I want to say I'm so looking forward to looking at that slideshow again. The work was so beautiful and urgent, and thank you. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Mother Dorothy for that amazing work. So today, along with my esteemed colleague, Theaster Gates, professor in the Department of Visual Arts and at the college, and founding and former director of the Arts and Public Life, a UChicago Arts Initiative housed at the Arts Incubator in Washington Park, it is our privilege to moderate this conversation with the inaugural Practitioner Fellows, Dr. Tara Betts and Ronaldo Hudson. The Practitioner Fellows program is supported in part by a grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to the Centering Race Consortium, a partnership between race studies centers at Brown University, Stanford University, UChicago, and Yale University to center the study of race in the arts and humanities. And I want to echo Alice's introductory comments and thank the teams at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture and the Posen Center Human Rights Lab for making this event possible. By way of brief introduction, and perhaps that's not necessary, I just want to give a kind of quick gloss of the incredible accomplishments of our practitioner fellows that we are so excited to be in conversation with this afternoon. Poet for the People Practitioner Fellow, Dr. Tara Betts is the author of 2 poetry collections, Break the Habit, Arc and Hue, and the forthcoming Refuse to Disappear. She also co-edited The Beijing of America and edited a critical edition of Philippa Duke Schuyler's Adventures in Black and White, and I apologize if I mispronounced any part of that name. Her sci-fi related writing has appeared in Cicada, Near Kin, a collection of words and art inspired by Octavia Estelle Butler, Octavia's Brood, science fiction stories from social justice movements, and the Hugo-nominated Luminescent Threads, connection to Octavia Butler. Her work has also appeared in Breakbeat Poets, The Long Term, Essence Magazine, Poetry Magazine, and many other publications. In addition to her work as a teaching artist and mentor for young poets, she's taught a weekly poetry workshop at Stateville Prison and has also taught at several universities, including Rutgers University and the University of Illinois, Chicago. In 2019, Tara published a poem celebrating Illinois' bicentennial with Candor Arts. Tara is poetry editor at another Chicago magazine and the Langston Hughes Review, and the lit editor at New City. Artist for the People Practitioner Fellow, Ronaldo Hudson, is an educator and community organizer whose work is focused on ending extreme sentencing in Illinois. He survived death row and life without the possibility of parole. He's a self-taught artist who learned to paint while on death row and has created a gallery of artworks. During his 37 years of incarceration, he obtained multiple certifications, an associate's degree, and a seminary bachelor's degree. Ronaldo is responsible for the groundbreaking Building Block Program, a transformational program run by incarcerated people within the Illinois Department of Corrections. He's currently the education director for the Illinois Prison Project. As part of their fellowships, Tara and Ronaldo will complete fellowship projects of their own design that explore an aspect of the carceral system, curate their own series of public events, and participate in various community and university engagements throughout the year. So we hope that you'll stay tuned and also attend. Theaster and let me pause here to welcome them into the frame. I hope we can get to gallery view on that. Theaster and we have so many questions to ask you both. But I also want to make sure to say right up top that this is a conversation. And so we hope that you'll raise your questions using the Q&A feature or the chat, and that, at 4:45 or so, we hope to turn to those questions to really engage everyone in the room. Theaster, you want to say anything before we jump in?
It's a pleasure here.
Great. So when Theaster and I were kind of dreaming together about what this conversation might look like, we wanted to actually start by raising a question about process, about the process of art making and how it is that you approach the various forms, whether in the case of Utah, who work across many kinds of written forms, or Ronaldo in your art practice, if you could walk us through how it is that you produce the work that you do.
Um, this is interesting because Ronaldo and I had a little strategy conversation earlier. And I mean, a lot of times when I'm creating work, I do it solitary kind of process. But when I've collaborated with people, I usually find that I'm immersed in whatever it is we decide is the common subject, right? I try to think of what are the threads that I wouldn't normally pursue, but also what are some of the threads that maybe my partner or collaborator hasn't considered, right? Like I wrote a libretto about Muhammad Ali, and my collaborator was an Asian American choreographer. So I went into thinking about how Ali is a speechifier, the Black historical end of it. What were some of the things, particularly with the Rumble in the Jungle, but also the brief intersection of when Malcolm X met Ali, and what were some of the possible ramifications of that meeting, which happened in Chicago. And my collaborator didn't know that, but how that would inform those poems and those voices was really important to me. But as far as Mr. Hudson and myself, I found out that from him, we were just talking, and that we both had connections to Kankakee, Illinois, where I was born and raised. And some of the stuff that he's planning, I don't want to speak on his behalf, he wanted to write about, it just started to spark ideas for me. And like some of the key words that he was thinking about, some of the ties that African Americans have had to the auto industry. What does it mean to have soul? How do we support that? How do we shape that? How do we find ourselves in the Midwest as African Americans? Like all these ideas started spinning around in my head, even though we were kind of chuckling and being very casual. So I'm looking forward to that, as well as some other stuff that I'm kind of excited to dig into with you guys this year.
Well, I love messing with people. And one of the beautiful things that I love about art is that the only way art becomes restricted if the art is restricted. And so as a free man, yay, right? I'm able to see everything. And so it's almost like the universe is just bringing things to me and say, hey, when you were in prison, you couldn't express this artistic idea. You couldn't share this perspective, right? You were limited and restricted to what they allowed you to buy and then what they allowed you to keep. Well, one of the things that I was sharing and I'm collaborating with her about is that there's a project that just came to me. And I went, just to tell you all briefly, to visit my home, my family's farm. And as I was visiting, right off the edge of the family farm, there's a railroad track. And a car actually caught a fire and burnt. And so one of the two sad things I discovered was that my family no longer owned the farm and that it's just been split up with multiple people. And then the second thing was that there was a fire and a car burnt, you know? And so I was kind of like walking and I was a little sad that one, like the family farm. And so I really can't venture into the land like I wanted to. But then when I walked up on the railroad tracks, I found at this site an emerging, if you will, of something that's so beautiful that I won't give it all away, that I'm actually like, man, it's like the soul of my family is still here. And now I get to share it with the world. And so it is so powerful, I think, and it's going to be so like I think, like, and maybe others may feel otherwise, but I'm already declaring it to be the greatest piece ever created by the world that I just get to take possession of. And so that's one of the projects I'm working on. Also, I have a project which is the sister to a painting I've done when I was incarcerated called Freedom Costs. I'm doing the sister painting to her actually on a cocktail table. And so I think it's going to be extremely awesome, right? But that's just two of the projects. I have a few, like I don't want to give y'all everything all at once, but the mediums that I love is the mediums that come to me. And so I'm learning to be mindful of that. Sometimes the medium will speak for you, right? We run to decide I'm going to use this, but then that doesn't work and that doesn't flow freely. And so I hope to have every piece share what I am seeing now as a free young man, right? And so I want to express that love to the world. And to me, there's no better way to express love. Well, there is, right, with your partner, but artistically, right? That there's no greater way to express love than through pure art that is not restricted by the limitations of someone's brain, or skill level. And so, yeah, so I love it. So I'm excited to get to work and to start sharing that art with the world.
Yeah. Tara, Tara, it's so good to hear you and Ronaldo talk about your process and to hear, like, for you, Tara, it sounds like those moments when you're collaborating, it's like a collective immersion. Like you go all in. It's almost like character acting or something. It's like you and then in that, out of that immersion or research, or whatever you call that, like that immersion then produces content, and in a way to being inspired by whatever's happening outside or inside, And so, Riley and I, we were thinking about, like, you both have this an activist heart, you're advocates, you're change makers. And I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit then about how your process for writing and making art, how those processes are connected to the work you do politically. And in a way, how do you imagine that those things come together and converge, or how do they create tension, for you out in the world?
Oh boy, that's interesting. And it may be because Ronaldo and I were talking about home before, earlier today. I keep thinking that with all the degrees, all the books I've read, the stuff that comes back to me the most that informs my process is thinking about how my mother taught me to treat people the way you want to be treated. Like, it's really something as simple as that. And the fact that she taught me how to read, and that you have to read things that embrace you, and that, choose consciously what you read, not just what you enjoy reading, but things that feed you in a way. And I think that lesson has followed me my whole life. I don't think I would be here if it hadn't been for that. And then also just thinking about, my father was not a scholar. He was like the total opposite of anybody who ever wanted to pick up a book. But between him and my paternal grandmother, I felt like I had such a deep love of Blackness and Black people. They taught me to love that. Like, a lot of times I think of the movie Lackawanna Blues. Is anybody familiar with that? The Ruben Santiago Hudson film. I met a lot of people in my childhood who were like the people in the boarding house in that movie. So to me, it's like everybody has a story. Everybody has a say. And it doesn't always come to light. And I just knew very early on, when I started reading books as a young reader, it's like, I want to see stories about people like that. And we're starting to see more of that now. And I think there's a danger of people going, oh, that's folky and old timey, and we need to tell new stories. And I feel like some of the new stories sound very much like a chocolate dip version of the old stories. So I'm like, we're not that far removed from it, right? Like, I'm just trying to think of how often there is this fascination with the new, the new. Like, there's always a 30 at under 30 list. There's always a 40 under 40 list, or, these are the hot new people in their 20s. And I'm like, you don't have the same vision, I don't think, in some ways. Like, I think you can break a lot of ground when you're a younger artist, but I think, and you have a lot more energy, but you don't have the same context all the time, even if you're looking at the same event. And for me, that's been really important. Like, can I talk to people who are my elders and also, people who are younger? I talk to my nephew all the time. He's 21 and I learn things from him, and I think we have to remember that it's a continuous learning process.
Well, it seems like a beautiful question to hold in tension, this question of kind of generational viewpoint and how, in a way, we need an emerging 20-year-old award because we want to encourage them, but we also need an emerging 60-year-old award in the power of ensuring over time that at every state of our artistic interest, there's a way that the world continues to see us, even if it's not the hot, new, shiny thing, and we're saying this, Tara, from being a little bit older than when we were the hot, shiny things. Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you.
Hey, can I respond to that question? Because I think it's important as an artist. Being seasoned, like one of the philosophies that I utilize, I read in a book once, and this leader used the expression that I love to trouble the troubled and to confront the comfortable. And so that is my desire. Like, I want to trouble the troubled and confront the comfortable. And one of the pieces that I'm thinking about reproducing is a painting of a friend of mine that was on death row with me. And his name is Frankie Red. And I love Frankie Red. He used to always sing blues. But anyway, one day I was going on a visit and Frankie Red called down to me and says, man, they're coming after me. I'm out of here. And I'm like, man, hold on, brother. It's going to be all right. And this was really close to when they were about to do the moratorium against the death penalty. But people were still struggling with the issue of waiting to die, waiting to be exterminated. And I think people don't really put enough emphasis on what the death penalty really is and what life without the possibility of parole consists of. Torturous sentences by people that don't understand the weight of them and the weight that they have on the psychology of anyone, guilty or innocent. And anyway, my friend, when I went on the visit, I said to the lieutenant that escorted me, check on my friend when you get back. And he like, yeah, okay. And so I had my visit. Then when I come back from my visit, I went to the cell. No sooner as they locked me in the cell, they called the code. And so my friend Frankie Red hung himself. And they weren't able to revive him because one, the guy didn't go back and check on him, but he was so frightened and so mentally ripped apart with the idea of being executed that he killed himself. Like, think about what that has to do to your mind. And so I painted a painting of him hanging in a cell. And when I painted this picture, the staff used to walk by and say, why are you painting such a painting? I said, because I remember my friend, and I don't want people to forget what incarceration will do to the soul and to the body. And so when you think about art and you think about powerful moments like this, I think those are the type of pieces that I'm already sure I'm going to duplicate it the more I think about it, because that painting came up missing, but it's not missing in my head. And the story is still in my heart. And I want to share with the world, not just beautiful paintings, because it's enough people going to paint beautiful things, but I'm an activist and I want to see an end come to perpetual punishment. I want to see an end come to people simply dying in prison cells because there is no hope. And so this is a platform that I'm so excited to be a part of, that allows me not only to share my gift with the world, but also my heart. And so I think that is vitally important. So I just wanted to add that.
You know, I missed part of it, but I do appreciate all of those things about aesthetics, right? And I keep thinking about, I don't know how to say this. I just feel like it's so hard for me because I feel like we're in a moment where everybody wants us to talk about pain and trauma all the time. But I'm also like when I see you, Ronaldo, I always think about resilience. I think about light. I think about power. I think about spiritual strength. Like all those things. And Alice just said, and joy in all capital letters. And I think without that, particularly for African Americans, Latinos, if you're a person of color in America, if you don't have any of that, how would you be here? How do you survive slavery? How do you survive Jim Crow? How do you survive being in an institution that is meant to crush your self physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, all of that? You can't if you don't find some inner resolve that's based in other things. And I think it's important to remember that. And that informs the work too. You know, like I feel better when I talk to you. I've only talked to you a few times and I'm just like, yes, this is his energy and his spirit. It's not necessarily just the story. And I think some people are really intrigued with the negative end of that story as opposed to the ability to challenge it and overcome it and survive it. You know what I mean?
Let me be clear about this. Beauty comes from ashes, right? When you know what to do with it. And so when I was sitting in death row and the state of Illinois said to Ronaldo Hudson, there's nothing redeemable about you. In fact, you're so horrible of a person, we will execute you to save the world from you, right? And I kind of alluded to it a little earlier when I was talking to y'all, and I said, man, I was disinvited to a death row party. At one point in my walk, I was so broken that even the people on death row didn't want to be around me. And so it was like really awakening. I was like, wait a minute now. How you gonna, like, I'm not trying to judge anyone, I promise y'all, but how you gonna be ice pick, right? and John Wayne Gacy, and go look at me and frown like, ooh, Ronaldo Hudson, right? I'm like, something's really, really wrong with that picture. And I didn't want to die in that state. And so my personal transformation and my personal awakening did not occur with my thinking I will be liberated and let out of prison. I simply made peace with, if I'm going to be executed by the state, I want at least one person to cry and say, you know what, there was something redeemable about him. And so when I got in that process, what I discovered was there are a bunch of hurting people and I wasn't alone. And we need some joy and some light. And so I started singing on death row, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And so I started walking through death row singing, right? I started singing, oh Lord, have mercy. And so I started walking in that. And I started saying to myself, I don't care that I'm guilty, I'm alive. And I'm sorry that I was broken. And so I began to realize, hey, man, there's power in thinking differently. There's, electricity that comes from hope. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. I didn't want to be sick anymore. So I started believing that even though I was living in a sewage, right, and turds were moving past me and urine was moving past, all the smelly stuff, I said, I'm going to get up out of this smelly swimming pool of feces and wash up, and started smiling. And then I discovered people like my smile. I'm like, really? Like, people like it when I smile? I'm like, well, I'm gonna smile more. And those walls started to melt around me. And I started recognizing that it wasn't the melanin in my skin that made me a good or bad person. It was the contents between my brain. And so I started reading. And I started studying. I studied the anatomy of government. I studied the history of America. I started reading, and I said, it's beautiful people in all skin tones. And I want to be friends with the people that's loving the earth and not the people trying to destroy it. So I don't want to start preaching, but that's just what it is.
Wow, I mean, don't stop. But also, I hope that I just want to say this has been so deep, and I just feel so moved, and I hope that the question that I offer is really just an opportunity for a continuation. But I also, I've been reading your interview, Ronaldo, and your poem in here, Tara, and I think that really where we have been, and the conversation has been far-reaching, but one of the things that I hope that you could maybe elaborate more for us is really about those kinds of references towards resilience. I mean, you're talking about the kind of name of the interview was I Follow the Philosophy of Harriet Tubman, the name of the poem, Think, Think. And so I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about some of those figures, whether it's family history, whether it's particular books, whether it's I love the reference to Lackawanna Blues. It made me think about Macy Gray in that bar space, but also the explicit reference to Aretha Franklin. So I'm just curious to hear you both kind of talk through a little bit more around what are the things that you draw to or that you feel drawn to for your inspiration.
Well, I mean, if Aretha's in it, it's clear the music is always in the poems. I kind of flinch when people say, "Oh, your poems are so musical," because sometimes I feel like there's another implication under that. But I often find it's like if it's something that is so core to how you celebrate and understand the world, or again, how you survive it, I think it's inescapable for me. Like for the past year, music has probably been a more consistent companion than even my closest friends because we can't go nowhere. So it's like, yes, I'm going to listen to Club Quarantine with DJ D Nice. Yes, I'm going to listen to Questlove. I'm going to do a Shaka Khan marathon or a Stevie Wonder marathon because that's the music that brings me back to why I do things in the world, right? But I think also too, like when I sat down to write Think, Think, I have these conversations with Alice, with David Stovall, with lots of other people, in this room and in other places. But I wanted to think about not just policing and prisons, but how different political issues are intertwined all the time. And the first thing that came to mind was I just saw, in particular when I was writing that poem, I saw a baton upraised like this in my head coming down and wondering what the whistle of the air would sound like when it's coming down. And then I was like, well, hell, the air's polluted too. And whose fault is that? And then I just kind of, it's the closest to a rant that I could probably get at this point in my writing. Sometimes I think I kind of rein myself in. And then there are other times it's like, I see the image or I start to see stuff kind of like a doldrum or a cyclone that just kind of wraps around me. And it's like, or I hear people talking in the doldrum. And then I'm just like, okay. And I'll start pulling it out, which is a weird metaphor to describe it. But I feel like you're doing a sort of channeling, right? When you do a poem. And some people, they look at poems like chants or spell casting, but it's like, once you get to a point where you can be so conscious and so focused, it gets to be easier to do that. And I don't feel like, I could write poetic form. I could do a narrative if I wanted to. I could make it sound like a song, but sometimes it just comes to you that way that you just put yourself in there so deep, it's soaked into you and you just start selecting the pieces and playing with or string them together and seeing what happens. I don't know if that answered your question. We all look pensive now.
No, that was beautiful. I mean, I think there was a small technical glitch, but I think we heard it, and I really appreciate that response. Ronaldo, do you care to weigh in?
Absolutely. Like, when, first of all, people, I always say this about Alice Kim, like, people don't know how long of a history and how much in my heart of an activist she is. And one of the things that was really welcoming and really warmed my heart was when I saw the the quilt that Mother Dorothy made, because I had never seen it, even though like other people saw it all over the world. And Alice Kim standing there and they said, if you don't help, Ronaldo Hudson will die. And so when you're in a dark hole and the world is steady standing on you and everyone is screaming how you don't deserve the right to breathe, like all of this stuff comes together to me. Like from George Floyd, you know, to the Ronaldo Hudson, people have been trying to snuff us out. And so that's because people didn't value us. You know, when that guy choked that brother out, he knew what he was doing, in my humble opinion. Much like many of the people, when you said when you wanted to know how that baton sound, I can tell you, ouch, it hurt. I've been cracked in the head with a few of them because I was resisting and fighting. But what I know is that there was something in me bigger than that, and that my greatest weapon wasn't balling up my fist, but beginning to write and beginning to like talk to people. And so I want to go back to, so what made, because I kind of went on a rabbit trail, but this is my point. When I think of Alice Kim and the work that she's continually doing and encouraging me to continually do, is to wake people up to every one of us can be an activist and have a tremendous impact on the world stage. And so I just want to remind people of that, is that, you know, people probably will never know how long and how deep, you know, the well is of that sister. Like last time I was with you all and we mentioned Dr. Barrows, you know, and I talked about the Harriet Tubman philosophy, right? Just to go back to that, the Harriet Tubman philosophy is leave no slave behind. There's no greater connection to slavery in my humble mind than the complex that they call corrections, those compounds that are slave plantations, that if you just looked at some of the yards and the pens they call holding pens, I call them slave pens, right? And you see the mentality that governs them. And so people loosely use, we want to deal with systemic racism. And, you know, I'm like, no, you don't, because it's a philosophy that is deeper than the flesh on someone's skin. It's a philosophy that allows people to abuse people and say it's all in the name of the law. And Black, brown, and white people adopt it. And so I want to be a part of eradicating systemic racism. And you can't do that hiding. You know, you can't do that like saying, okay, I'm going to be afraid of ruffling someone's feathers. To me, artists have to be feather rufflers, right? Ruffle somebody's feathers. And so I love, once again, from the artistic perspective, is that I love the fact that the University of Chicago and all those that support us, right, are saying, come on with it, right? Bring your best shot. We're ready to share you with the world. And so get ready, because I want to shock the world, but I want to also love the world. And so they're not a contradictory, because truth, right, is what the world needs. And art is the easiest way to express it.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, I just want. Yeah. Oh, you want to say something?
No. Go ahead, Sister Tara. Okay.
I've been thinking a lot about some of the other nuances in talking about prisons too. And I know we've talked a little bit about some of that stuff too, Ronaldo, but as a woman, I always feel like there's a couple of things that are always on my mind whenever we talk about prisons. And one of them being is how women's prisons are always under-resourced. They get far fewer educational resources, donations, attention. I'm hoping somehow in the course of this year, we can do some more conversations around that and gender. And we've talked about, you know, talking about what does it mean to be trans and be incarcerated as well. And Ronaldo has talked about work with one of his colleagues around that. But I also think a lot about, particularly because of the recent release of Poetry Magazine, where I co-edited an issue that featured incarcerated writers and people who have been intimately involved with the carceral system. And one of the things that came up that was the huge controversy around this issue was that there was someone who had sexually assaulted someone, and he had been incarcerated for an inordinate, probably what they call the largest collection of child pornography that's ever been found. Now, in spite of my personal feelings about that, it really was very difficult to be like, how do I stand by my beliefs around prison abolition? How do I start to talk about this and say I stand with survivors of violence? And how can I also say that censorship is not possible in this situation? And we did the very difficult decision of being like, we're not pulling anything. It's already in print. It's already online. And if you come for this one contributor, then you can come for everybody. And that was a hard call to make. And it made me, and I talked a lot about this with Alice because, you know, Alice cares about how you feel as a human being, which I think that's why I'm so excited about working with Alice closely in this. And we talked a lot about Erica Miner's book, The Feminist and the Sex Offender, right? Like, how do you stand by what you believe in the face of that? Or in my case, knowing how many women of color often bear the brunt of sexual assault and it goes unreported, right? So I'm hoping to kind of wrestle with some of that in my work and looking at the Ida B. Wells archives at Regenstein Library this year, because so much of her argument around the anti-lynching crusade was about the criminalization of Black men and how sexual assault was weaponized in this country, right? So there's all these conversations. We're not having new conversations, but some of those conversations are being sidestepped and ignored. So yes, there's this whole conversation about how does the system damage Black men, which is very real, you know? Like, I think about that all the time, and how there's all these Black men that I know have been there, I talked to, and I can't help but think, what would it be like if they were home, right? What if you were there to be dad and be there every day? What if you were there to be a husband and be there every day? What if you were working in the community and teaching other people how to do things? And that's an astronomical loss. There's no amount of money the state can put on that, right? So I hope we kind of think about those more nuanced conversations too as the year goes on, you know?
Hey,
All right,
listen.
thank you for that. Yeah. Go
Can
ahead.
Well, I just want to say, because I love what she just shared, and one of my personal issues is I've noticed since I've been home, like really how the issues with our sisters in prison is really, really ignored. And I'm really grateful that I work for the Illinois Prison Project, and they're dealing specifically right now with the Women's Campaign, the Survivors Campaign of women that are doing tremendous time, and they were victims of abuse. And so there's not a lot of attention being given to it. So every chance I get, I always remind people, let's not forget the sisters. You know, let's not forget that their voices have been really silenced. And the worst thing you can do to any human being is silence them, shush them. And so our system, our criminal legal system, because it's not a criminal justice system, it's a criminal legal system, right, that most of us don't have real representation in. But anyway, so I just want to just let you know, I'm working directly right now with the Department of Correction to do more education about how do we address this issue. So last week, I actually hosted an event that was dealing with the vaccination And so they had all the prisons on in Logan. And one of the things that I noticed during the presentation was that no one was saying anything from Logan. And so I specifically addressed the sisters in Logan and asked them, hey, why aren't you all asking any questions? And they were afraid to be heard. And so I brought this to the attention of the chief of staff, Camilla Lindsay, and Director Jeffries. And so they're now doing an initiative to do more events with the sisters. So we can talk more about that. So we want to do something to actually talk with the sisters. Let's get it on, right? Because the opportunity is here. And so as artists, right, we have a responsibility to affect those spaces that are not being heard, right? And so I just want to just share that, like, the window and the doorway is open. It's just a matter if we want to go through it. And so I want to encourage you, like, get at me. Let's reach back at them because they're ready. You know, they just don't have no one that understand that we can actually make the difference. And we don't have to go and recruit other people to do what we can do ourselves. Yeah. So I just want to say
Ronaldo, yeah, I mean, it's kind of overwhelming what you guys have been able to pack into 40 minutes, you know, because I mean, there are all these things that I feel like we need about 5 or 6 hours to unpack. And, you know, we want to leave some time for a couple questions from the other folk here. But I do want to reiterate something you said, Tara, that that the political is always intertwined with the artistic, you know, and you can't be any more to like the stuff. And I had the same response about, you know, what happens when you make an image of a hanging, you know, and there's a lot of documentation, a lot of research about, you know, projecting these images both in literature and the image itself of the lynching. Like, what do those things mean? But it's also like, how do you start to articulate to a public the truth that these things continue to happen, even when a public thinks that they've gone completely addressed, you know? So, you know, just thank you both for your truths, you know. And Brother Ronaldo, you know, people talk about your joy. And the thing that I've learned about joy over time is that if you've never been through things, you don't really have a whole lot to talk about or be happy about. But it seems like the people who are most joyous are people who have gone through things and have gotten to the other side. You know, the matter of women's imprisonment on our minds, and also big thanks to you both for your care and for your time today. Brother Riley?
Well, we're starting to get questions in chat, but I just want to echo the profound gratitude and awe at the way this conversation has been going. And I don't know, Sandra Jackson Apoku, would you like to say your question aloud, or would you like for me to read that? Please. The way this is working out, I'm not sure if I would know. So maybe if you send a chat affirmation, because I don't know if I'll see you on the screen to indicate.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear
Perfect.
me? Okay.
Yes.
Tara, you mentioned prison abolition. And I was wondering if you could expound on your philosophy about prison abolition, and also how will you pursue this project?
Oh,
You're on mute.
there we go. I've realized it after the first sentence. So for me, prison abolition is a philosophy that's still kind of evolving for me in a lot of ways. I think I first started to think about it in the 90s when I was doing organizing around the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal, who they are currently looking for ways to get him out and get him released because he has come down with COVID. He's an older gentleman at this point, and that was kind of the catalyst for me in a lot of ways to think about and really question how not only the justice system is racist, but also the institution of prison is racist, classist, and fundamentally does not work. It does not correct anything, right? Can you guys hear me? I saw my connection was unstable. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So for me, that's the foundation of everything. It's like, it doesn't work, right? But then I'm also thinking a lot about Maya Shenwar's new book, Prisons by Any Other Name. And in it, she talks about all these alternatives to prisons, but how those don't quite work either, because we still haven't addressed the fundamental problems of racism, homophobia, transphobia, poverty, mental health, all of these things that make it very hard to implement an alternative. So for me, I'm kind of on the fence about, okay, what do we do when there's a question of how do we handle a problem when a crime is committed, right? If someone is assaulted or beat down in the street on your block, who do you call, right? Or you think about what are some of the alternative systems? For example, like I was thinking about earlier, when someone has a mental health breakdown or an episode in the street, a lot of people will call the police. And unfortunately, that's led to a lot of people being shot or being incarcerated when really people just didn't know that maybe there was a lapse in their medicine or they experienced a traumatic episode and they probably just need somebody to talk them down or have a crisis intervention. They go immediately into a violent kind of response and incarceration being one of them. But there are some places where they've set up networks where it's like, they say, look, if you see this, call this person. I know there's a website now that currently does that, like who to call instead of the police. And I'm thinking about what does that mean for us to start setting up alternative systems that would prevent incarceration or be a substitute for incarceration. And I think that conversation hasn't been pushed to its limits at this point, but that's what we really need, as opposed to locking somebody up to the point where they're a senior citizen and then they have no family left. Because I've seen that too, right? Somebody gets out 40, 50 years later, their parents are gone. They have no children. How is that redemptive for anybody? So all of that, those things are kind of what's plaguing me right now.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions from the audience, but we have a couple of minutes if someone wants to enter a question. We'd love to hear from more folks in the room.
Hey,
Riley, is
listen.
it okay? Yeah, is it okay if I ask one? Because Brother Ronaldo, when you were talking, really, really beautifully about how when something happened while you were imprisoned, there was that trying to ensure that only your friend heard your voice and knew that you were an ally, right? And then there were these other moments where it moved you to art, right? But it's like relationship on one side, and then the output at other times is art. When I think about that, I'm always thinking about how does the relationships we have lead to the stories that we share, lead to a way, this way you were talking about Alice Kim, that in a way, Alice is also part of this storytelling cohort that then out in the world has a method for making the issue of criminalization of Black people, Black and brown people, something that's at the top of a person's mind, even when it is. I want to have you do a little more about moments where you would choose between a good word, a prayer, or a call to action, as it relates to an object that you made,
Well, you kind of broke up a lot, so I don't know if I'm answering your question as clearly, but I think all of those things are imperative. I think that you have to recognize relationship, right? Relationship is necessary because I have to trust you to walk with you, right? And so you crawl before you walk before you run. And so I believe that we should always have a call to action. Like I am a minister of the gospel, right? And so I know that you can have a good sermon and not have a call to action, right? And so if we're talking about real change, right? When the sister was talking about abolition, I'm an abolitionist, just for the record. I don't apologize. I don't think that you can pretty up prison ever, right? They should shut them down. Now, that being said, she made some very valid points. I lived in prison for 37 years. I know people that made me say, hey, wait a minute, man, right? Like, you finna go home tomorrow? And so it brought concern to me. I'm like, okay, Lord Jesus, like, I need you to really wrap this dude up because he messed up and he's being released to the world. And then I seen some people that were so beautiful exterminated by the state, because the state said, hey, your appeals are resolved and an honorable court, right, has issued a warrant for your death. And so for me, I'm always going to be an activist. I'm always going to be calling to people every chance I get to get in the room and say, hey, could you give, just quickly, when I was in prison, I had favor within the administration, not because I was a Uncle Tom, a kiss up, a snitch. I was a man of integrity. I actually formed a program where I taught a class on integrity, right? Accountability and responsibility, right? My program, The Building Block, is based upon 5 principles: respect, responsibility, ownership, community, and empathy. I noticed that the administrators weren't teaching principles that I can trust to say, you know what, these brothers went through this program, released them to the community, because we were now in charge of rehabilitating ourselves. That's what made our program so strong. And so it was only the pandemic, right, and COVID that slowed that process down. But I think it's vitally important that we're in charge of bringing our sons and daughters home, and we should be the ones that you call. Call Ronaldo, hey man, Lil William, them over here acting up, right? Go get them. Most incidents, like, y'all familiar with the broken window theory? The broken window theory is based on, even though the crazy mayor kind of hijacked it, but it's really a theory based upon if a broken window goes unrepaired, then people will begin to vandalize that space because it's not being tended to. And that's all that's happening to our community. Because it's not being tended to, it's easy for weeds to grow and choke people out. Well, we want to start dealing with that. And you can't deal with that if you're afraid. If you're afraid of me, you're not going to address me. And too many of us, I'm an elder now at 57 years young. I'm not afraid of them young brothers and sisters walking around. I want to have conversations with them and ask them, hey, help me understand how you see the world. And then they know that if they reveal who they are to me, I'm not finna go get the police and say, hey, he got a gun. I'm gonna try to tell him, hey man, give me that. You don't want to do that. And then destroy it. I'm not taking nobody's baby and turning them over to the devil to talk about, we want to know what happened to him. You turned your sons and daughters over to a system that's a monster. It's a machine. It has no emotional connection to them. It's only financial benefit. That's all the criminal justice system is a financial benefit to people that live in rural America, rural Illinois, because I just drove down to Dixon to pick a brother up. Yay, right? I'm so excited about that. But check this out. I had to go down so many back roads. I was like, man, I'm going to the end of the earth. And they plant these prisons like that as monuments to us, because you have so many young men that can tell you where every prison in the state is, but they can't tell you where the John Hancock is located. They can't tell you about the Shedd Aquarium or the museum. They can't name one artist other than some rapper. And I'm not against any genre of music. I love all music. But we have to figure out, how do we educate people? Because educated people make different decisions. The civil rights movement was predicated upon students in college that woke up and said, hey, this ain't right. The same spirit is occurring with Black Lives Matter. Those young kids is like, man, we know this is wrong and we're not going to stand for it. And all these old elders, with all due respect to y'all, right, and us, right, get out the way. Old men for counsel, young men for war. Get out of their way, just counsel them. Hey, come here. You all right? So anyway, yeah. I think we should have another event, right? And so, because I think we could never do this again.
That's right.
I'm with it. I'm out. I'm in. Alice, log it. Right? I declare it, right? Because if we don't take the airways, then our enemies will take them and talk about us rather than us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear.
So let's take the airways, man, and tell our stories.
And I think that that's the best place to pause. That this is in fact a pause and not a period. And I hope that you'll also see Ronaldo on the Art and Imagination Inside Prisons event on April 6th. Tara Butts is also doing an event on April 14th with the Chicago Public Library. And tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central, CSRPC is supporting a More Than Diversity event around reparations. We hope to see you in all of these venues and more. Thank you so much, Tara and Ronaldo, for the work and for your willingness to share with us today. Thank you so much, Theaster. Thank you to the teams at Posen Center and at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. And thanks everyone for attending and for your questions. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all of them today, but I look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.